Okay, good morning and welcome everyone. I'm Zane Dames, the Marketing and Events Manager at Digital. I'm pleased to welcome you to Navigating Licensing and Collaboration with Academia and Federal Departments, another fantastic subject as part of our IP webinar series at Digital. Before we get started, we respectfully acknowledge that in Canada we live, work and learn on the unceded traditional and ancestral land of Indigenous people. As myself and much of the digital team are based in Vancouver, British Columbia, we are gathered here on the traditional ancestral territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, and we encourage you to take a moment to acknowledge and let us know in the chat the traditional territory that you are joining us from. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and we will be shared with our audiences in the coming week. If at any point during the session you have a question, please type it into the chat and we'll address them at the end during the Q&A portion. That's it from me, and I'll be handing it over to Jen to get this webinar started. Thank you, Jen.
Thanks so much, Zane. Bonjour, everyone, and welcome. It's wonderful that we have attendees joining in from across the country for this month's webinar. Whether you're new or a returning participant to Digital's IP series, we're thrilled that you can join us for this Thought Leadership Power Hour. Next slide, please. In today's interconnected landscape, collaboration between academic institutions, federal departments, and industry is dynamic and vibrant. Cross-sector partnerships hold the power to fuel innovation, drive commercialization, and make meaningful societal impacts, and are also come with their own unique challenges. Over these next 60 minutes, we'll walk through some of the common hurdles faced, tools and best practices to inform productive collaborations in academic and federal licensing, success stories of innovative partnerships and projects, and an overview of Explore IP Platform, a searchable marketplace of public sector patent holders key in Canada's IP strategy. Next slide, please. Fundamental to the global innovation clusters is collaborative innovation, setting the framework for projects that address cross-industry challenges while creating technology products and services that can scale across industries and ultimately across the world. Digital's IP strategy supports the development, ownership, and retention of Canadian IP through numerous vehicles, and informational sessions with thought leaders like we've today are one example of that. Next slide, please. I have the pleasure of introducing today's powerhouse panel. Please join me in welcoming Mike Sharka, Chris Canters, Reda Damu, and Grant Lines. Mike is Director of Research Partnerships at the University of Waterloo, where he oversees Waterloo's activity in industry university research and government contracts, and has over 25 years of experience in university partnerships and technology commercialization, including positions at the University of Toronto, Queen's University, Ontario Tech, and the Ontario Centres of Innovation, and was recipient in 2020 of the AUTM, which is comprised of over 800 organizations around the globe, the award for career contribution to the field of technology transfer in Canada. Chris is IP commercialization lead at NRC Canada. With over 20 years of experience in IP and business development from the lab to industry, he has a strong track record for building research alliances and commercializing novel technologies in fields diverse such as biomaterials, software, nanomaterials, fuel cells, and wastewater treatment. Prior to joining the NRC, Chris was National Director, IP and Business Development at FP Innovations, where he was instrumental in developing complex research and licensing agreements, securing funding resulting in first-in-the-world biomaterials plants being built in Canada, and a key player behind the creation of Celluforce, a joint venture which was created to commercialize FP Innovations' nanocrystalline cellulose IP portfolio. Reda is Senior Outreach and Partnerships Officer at Explore IP, a program offered by Innovation Canada to help Canadian businesses achieve success through collaboration with public sector institutions. He brings his experience from working with SMEs across the country into Explore IP's outreach efforts, which are focused on industry organizations that help Canadian businesses grow and become more successful. And last but not least, Grant, Senior Advisor at the IP Center of Expertise, providing strategic advice and guidance to federal departments and agencies regarding IP issues, including the commercialization of IP and negotiation of the IP aspects of contribution agreements with companies that receive federal funds. Previously, he was in private practice, focused on pharmaceutical patent litigation, trademark oppositions, and patent licensing, and was in-house counsel for Nortel, where he negotiated patent licenses and managed US and Canada litigation. Grant has also held leadership roles with the Intellectual Property Institute of Canada, where he served as chair of the Litigation and Intervention Committee and president from 2017 to 2018. And with that, Mike, I hand it over to you.
Great. Give me a moment here to set up the screen share. Okay, I assume that is working. If it's not working, somebody let me know.
It's working, Mike.
Okay, great. So I'm going to talk about managing IP and academic collaborations. I'm going to talk about it from Waterloo's point of view, the practices that we employ. But as was noted in my introduction, I've worked at several other universities and other organizations, and I can say that this is probably what I'm going to say is fairly typical of others in the field as well. So why bother with university R&D collaborations? Well, universities have amazing facilities and expertise. Most of the work is done by graduate students at very low salary costs. So you're paying typically about $25,000 a year for somebody who's already got a degree in science, engineering, computer science, or whatever. Low overhead costs. Typically, universities charge 30 to 40% for overhead, which is way, way less than the actual overhead costs of laboratory personnel in the private sector. Extensive financial leverage available from the government. You can get 1, 2, 3 times your money invested from various programs such as NSERC Alliance and MyTax. And you can conduct research without adding headcount or infrastructure if you have a problem to solve, but you don't need to build a big R&D department. Now, not every kind of project suits a university collaboration. The work must be appropriate for inclusion in a master's or PhD thesis in most cases. We do some work for hire, but it tends to be things like analytical testing, materials testing, that sort of thing. There needs to be some sort of general scientific or technological question being probed and significant uncertainties. So this is research, not work for hire in general. And I also tend to recommend to companies that they don't want necessarily engage with universities what I call the crown jewels, the trade secrets that may be at the core of their operation. Yes, universities will sign NDAs and we'll do our best to respect them, but there's a lot of risk involved still in having extremely valuable secret information. And it also interferes with the ability to publish, which is, of course, critical to any collaboration with a university. The research has to be published, although it can be protected, as I'm going to talk about. So there are 4 critical IP considerations: who owns it, who manages it, who has the rights to use it, and who benefits financially. I find oftentimes that people obsess over number 1, but in a lot of ways it's actually the least important. Who owns it is not really the big issue. Ownership will be determined by some combination of institutional policy, the inventorship, the extent of company investment. That is, if the company's putting not very much cash in, the institution and the creators may not feel they have a right to have a big ownership stake in the IP. The positions of each side, basically how critical it is for them and their motivations for wanting to own the IP, and ultimately what gets negotiated. The benefits of owning, once again, it should be reminded that, of course, IP rights are in some sense a negative right. They allow you to go after others for infringing. And if that's something you need to be able to do, then it helps to own the IP. It's also valued as an asset, and this can be very important for example, venture-backed startup companies to have patents as an asset that both increases their valuation and potentially gives investors some bit of upside if the company fails. IP management, patents will usually be filed by the owner, but in most cases, institutions will want to be reimbursed for any legal costs if the company has an exclusive license, and possibly even if they don't. If the company doesn't want to pay patent costs, in most cases, the university will say, okay, well, we won't do it either, because if it isn't valuable enough for you guys to pay the patent costs, then odds are we're not going to make any money off it on anybody else. But in any event, all parties should be consulted on the language and the claims if patents are filed. I've seen cases in the past where the university inventors are surprised by the way that the company drafted the patent, and they feel that certain things that could have been claimed were left out. So the owner will have the rights to decide who has rights to use. In most cases, if the institution owns, the sponsor will be granted a non-exclusive royalty-free license. We call that a NERF. So that means the company doesn't have to pay anything in order to use the technology. They've already paid for it by sponsoring the project. If the company owns, the university will always retain rights for its own use in research and teaching. Sometimes you get involved in long, drawn-out discussions over whether it's commercial research or non-commercial research the university retains its rights to. I try to avoid those conversations as much as possible, because what's commercial research and what's non-commercial research can be ambiguous. But the point is, the university doesn't have the ability to pass those rights on to anybody else. So the company is relatively safe by granting these rights. And the license rights, of course, can be divided by territory or field of use. I'll talk about that a bit more. Who gets the benefits? Non-exclusive licenses provide freedom to operate for the sponsor. Many times they will want an exclusive license, and that will usually require some sort of payment to the owner, because the owner is giving up exclusivity, royalties or other arrangements. But the exclusive licensee can control use of the IP by others then. So if they have an exclusive license, typically they'll be the ones who will be monitoring infringement. In my experience, very few of these transactions that arise from sponsored research involve a lot of money changing hands between the sponsor and the university, except in the case of pharmaceuticals, which have their own set of characteristics. So I'll talk about deal structures in sort of 4 general classifications based on who owns the IP. And I've seen all of these sort of schemes used over the years in many cases. The company may own the IP, the creators or the university may own the IP. It may be jointly owned, it may be open sourced. Company ownership, when does that make sense? Well, it makes sense if the company has dominant background IP and the arising IP is incremental. If the company, for example, has all the patents and IP to build a spaceship, and the university comes up with a left-handed screw for attaching one flange, it may not make sense for the university to have any ownership stake in that tiny component of a much broader IP estate. On the other hand, if that left-handed screw can be used in automotive applications and building desks and chairs and who knows what else, then there may be some rights that should come back to the university. And there are different ways to do that. As I note below on the slide, the company can provide a license back outside its field of use. So if the company owns the IP, but they could grant a license back to the university to commercialize in areas outside of, for example, let's say aerospace, if they're indeed building a rocket ship. And that gives the opportunity for, graduate students who want to create a spin-off company or whatever to have enough rights to actually, potentially do something useful with it. If the IP relates to a key competitive advantage of the company, if it's really core to their intellectual property, they may want to own it in that case. And as I mentioned before, if they're a venture-backed company, then having that ownership of IP may be important to them. Payments related to IP assignments are possible, usually not royalties. Royalty agreements tend to come when you're licensing the technology, because then you have the hammer of saying, okay, I hereby revoke your license because you didn't pay your royalties. If the company owns the IP and you're trying to get royalties out of them, then you're sort of stuck in a collections environment. But another way that we've done this in the past sometimes is based on sort of success payments. So a lump sum if a patent is filed, a lump sum if a patent is issued, a lump sum if a technology is used in a commercial, in the first commercial sale. And sometimes these payments can be very small, a little reward to the graduate students for giving up the ownership of their IP, or they can be more substantial if it's a really significant piece of IP that's been created. Inventor and university ownership makes sense if the company only needs access to the IP, but they don't need to own it. If the IP is in an area that's highly aligned with the professor's future research directions, then they may want to retain some significant control of it. I've told researchers on many occasions that for the sake of a $50,000 contract, they don't want to put an IP brick wall in front of their future research directions because it could be career limiting for them. So that's a point where the university has to, and the creators have to think very seriously about the extent of rights that they want to grant to the sponsor. Oftentimes, though, if the company only needs access to it and they don't want that to get an exclusive license, as I mentioned before, a lot of times it will just end up being published because the university has more IP than it can spend the money on to maintain protection of. And if the company's not interested, probably nobody else will be either. The company will often be granted an exclusive license, but as I mentioned before, it can be limited by field of use or by territory. And that's a useful thing to do because the company shouldn't, in principle, need rights outside their field of use, and that gives other opportunities for commercialization in other areas. Joint ownership, I get a lot of requests from that from researchers. I generally try to steer them away from it because it actually doesn't work that well. It works a bit better with copyright than for patents. It has the benefit of seeming fair to the parties, but it creates all kinds of complications. Who pays patent costs? If you make a deal to split them 50-50, then what if one side decides they no longer want to pay those patent costs? Do they have to surrender all their rights or get dragged along for costs forever? Who can grant licenses? That varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. The law is different in Canada than the US, for example. Who prosecutes infringers and who gets the benefit of a settlement? And who actually benefits from the IP? Is the benefit of that joint ownership equal for the two partners? And finally, open sourcing. We do a lot of this. It makes sense if your object is wide adoption. If you're building a technology and you want others to build additional applications, build additional improvements, putting it out there can be a really good thing to do. And particularly if nobody wants to patent or if the IP is a relatively small incremental advance. And it's very common for software. And I will leave it there. I'm happy to answer questions. And of course, I'm always happy to talk about the University of Waterloo and our approach to partnering. So I think I've stopped sharing.
It has stopped sharing, Mike. Thank you.
All right, I guess I'm up. My name is Chris Canters. I'm IP commercialization lead at NRC, and today I'm going to have a chat with you about navigating licensing in collaboration with the National Research Council. I wanted to just let me know if you can see the slides changing. Mike, can you see that change? Did it change? Yeah, okay. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on NRC. A lot of the people likely on this call are very familiar with NRC IRAP because of the grants it provides to small, medium enterprises. But there is also a very large research component to NRC, and some people like to say this is one of the best kept secrets in Canada. But we are a fairly extensive research organization with 2,000, almost 2,300 researchers, kind of spread across the entire country at 24 different sites. One of our key mandates is around collaborating to support business innovation in Canada. So last year we had 1,577 R&D collaborations, and those were collaborations with government agencies, with industry, with academia, in some cases 2 out of the 3 or all 3 involved. And between our IRAP program, our challenge programs, and our research, we helped about 9,700 Canadian SMEs last year. One of the things I also wanted to highlight is there are some programs available at NRC to really help facilitate collaborations with industry and academia. We do have, our small medium enterprise preferred rate program, which is basically a reduction in our labor rates for companies that are eligible in that SME eligible. We also have what are called IRAP certificates, which essentially will allow for SMEs again to have a 50% of the cost of a project to be covered by IRAP. So those are a couple of things that will help facilitate collaborations, de-risk technology development, et cetera, when you're working with NRC. Some people may not be familiar with our challenge programs. For this particular audience, some of the one I highlighted a few that are quite relevant, but since digital is quite sector agnostic and pretty well ubiquitous across all sectors at the moment, I think I encourage you to take a look at our website for the various challenge programs that are available. And essentially those programs will allow you potentially to get grant money to support your project. I'm going to talk a little bit about IP commercialization and technology development. And what I guess I want to say here, this is a bit of a busy slide, but NRC collaborates with companies at various stages when it comes to developing IP. In some cases, the parties start off together working on a project, and both parties will collaborate to generate new IP, and then there'll be clauses within agreements to cover the treatment of that IP. In other cases, NRC and the client both have developed IP, and we bring it to the table together and then go on from there to further develop the technology or an application of the technology or what have you. In some cases, companies come to us to basically for us to help them in terms of perhaps an application or what have you. But similar to what Mike mentioned, the IP there where they built a big portfolio, and what we're doing is building a small piece on top. That's the kind of area where assignment is possible at NRC. And the final one I just want to mention is NRC has a lot of big internal research programs across the organization where we develop technology, and we might go a little further than perhaps academia in some cases, where we're doing field trials of technology, building fairly sophisticated prototypes, et cetera. And in those cases where we take it to high TRLs and so forth, often we simply license that technology to get that into the marketplace. I did want to mention some of the patent portfolio that NRC has. It's a fairly extensive portfolio right now, over 1,951 patents and patent applications. And this is just a heat map that kind of shows you the main technology fields where our IP resides. And I wanted to, and we are going to have a talk by Retta about the Explore IP, but this is a tool that I think is incredibly valuable for, if you're not aware of it, type it into Google, Explore IP, and you'll find it very easily. But it allows you to look at public sector IP that's available and available for licensing, essentially. And what it does, I think, it in a big organization like NRC, it'll allow you to connect with the right people at NRC quickly in a particular technology or IP area. And essentially at the moment it comes to me and to the director of business when there's an inquiry. Now, NRC has not been doing spinoffs for some time now, but we are exploring some other concepts with incubators and entrepreneurs around potentially starting companies that can take some of this technology to the market. Jen had asked us to talk about some potential challenges to collaborations and strategies. You know, Mike, I think, talked about a lot of them, but I want to talk about maybe some that might be a little more unique to NRC, a government organization. One of the things I've been here 3.5 years, and one of the things, if you want to really accelerate some of these discussions, you know, using the government template as a starting point is a good thing to help in making that process more efficient. Some of the other ones I'm going to talk about here really are typical things you'd see for collaboration, but I find are quite important to make sure the expectations are met. And so I think really key is communication, setting up regular meetings to discuss progress. One of the things, it is research in the most part here we're talking about, so it does have surprising outcomes in many cases. So being able to meet on a regular basis to discuss challenges as well is really key to having success in these collaborations. Expectations, obviously, if you can agree on the goals up front of these projects, it's really critical to manage everybody's expectations. Some people will say the government has a different sense of urgency than industry. What I suggest here is, you know, make sure you set up a project plan with agreed to timelines with regard to deliverables, just so that everybody's comfortable with the timelines that are going to be used in order to get certain research outcomes. IP ownership, I think Mike talked a lot about this. There are, you know, minor differences between maybe government and academia. We do have some, I'll just give you an example here. Basically, when you talk about copyright and ownership of copyright, because that's a Crown asset, to get a transfer or assignment of copyright, we would have to go to the Governor General. So that's not a very practical approach. So that's the kind of situation where we would look at licensing. So there are some uniquenesses because they're Crown assets, but a lot of the considerations that Mike mentioned are also ones that are key here. Licensing, one of the things, and I've been involved in licensing for 20+ years now, and one of the things that to really move along discussions and so forth, if the company is prepared to share a high-level business plan that kind of outlines where they want to go with the technology, where is their focus going to be in terms of fields of use, etc. That can go a long way into getting initial term sheets in place and putting an agreement in place. And again, this is obviously shared under confidentiality. But it from my experience, it can really help in moving the discussion more quickly to an agreement, and that's a benefit to the parties. So I also, Jen had asked for some collaboration success stories, and one of the things I want to mention here is that success can look very different depending on what you need. So, for example, we have some state-of-the-art facilities that are unique in the entire world. Just having access to that would be very helpful to certain companies that don't have that kind of capability internally. So just getting access to facilities might be a success for that company to test its product. But one of the other things I wanted to mention, and I won't go through all the potential examples here, but one of the things I wanted to mention is sometimes success actually from a research, with respect to research outcomes, is actually a decision not to pursue additional research or commercialization of a technology, because that means the company can avoid a lot of spending and resources, perhaps in something that might not end up being successful. So the next few slides are a few examples I just wanted to highlight of different types of collaborations. The first one you see here is E2IP Technologies. This is a relationship that NRC has had for about 10 years now. And it started off around molecular ink technology to enable printed electronics. And with time, E2IP really wanted to explore some of the applications around the technology. And so our automobile and surface transportation group got involved in this relationship as well. And really through that long relationship, we took technology that was quite low TRL, advanced it forward and looked at in a number of applications. And that partnership has been invaluable to the company in terms of getting to the point where the combination of that IP plus its own IP has really allowed it to get the kind of funding success that it recently got from the market. A totally different example of success maybe this is a case where NRC developed technology within the Construction Research Center. And this was in support of the government's push toward reduced emissions, reduced energy usage, etc. And that technology was developed and it was actually field tested on buildings in different parts of the country. And we got it fairly advanced when we decided to go do an outreach campaign to Canadian companies. And that's where we connected with ThermTest, and we concluded a license agreement with them last year. And they're very shortly will be introducing their product to the market. And the final one I just wanted to mention here is Technar. This was back in the days, we started this relationship back in the days when there were spinoffs from NRC. And so this was a spinoff based on one piece of IP at the time. But that relationship has continued for the last 3 decades. And a number of technologies were licensed to the company over that period of time, which were essentially the basis for its various products that it has now. And today, Technar is about 55 people selling product in about 30 different countries. So just a few examples of the kinds of collaborations, the kinds of licensing that can happen at different stages, from early stage all the way through to when a technology is fairly well developed. And I'll be happy to answer questions when we reach that part of the panel.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you. Reda, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So just bear with me a quick second. I'm going to share my screen. Are you able to see it?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. So thank you very much for having us today. As Jen said earlier, I'm here to present Explore IP, which is a tool that has been developed by Innovation Canada in order to help make connections between public and private industry. So let's go through it here. So I'll start by kind of explaining a little bit our mandate. What do we do here at Explore IP? So our intention was really to build a centralized database in order to help making those connections between public and private industry. The intent is really to bring all of that information into one place. We've heard from Chris and Mike earlier about 2 different public sector, what we describe as public sector institutions, so a university as well as a government department that do a lot of work, R&D work within their labs, and that build those collaborations as well through their own efforts. We're here to help them in order to bring all of that information from across the country into a one-stop shop. And yeah, we hold IP assets, so intellectual property assets that are held by various public sector institutions and some non-for-profit organizations as well, all in one place, as I will show you a little bit later through a demonstration. As of today, we have various inventions that spread through 46 different technology areas. Those are held by 63 different IP holders. And as of today, I believe we have a little over 5,300 different opportunities. One question that we receive often is what is the difference between this database and CIPO's database, the Canadian Intellectual Property Office database. So the major difference is that we only publish opportunities or IP assets, so mostly patents and patent applications that are available for licensing and collaboration. Whereas CIPO's database, the Intellectual Property Office database, when it comes to patents, that is the extensive list of patents that are available or that have been published, within Canada. So that's the major difference between the two. Within the platform, each institution, which I will list a little bit later, each institution has full control of their own portfolio, and they're able to upload patent applications, patents, and various other types of IP opportunities. And as of today, we've received we've facilitated, I should say, a little bit over 370 different contact requests. And a contact request in our, what we mean by that is when an industry representative or a company reaches out to an IP or patent holder on our platform in order to start a conversation regarding a specific technology that was published on Explore IP. So let's go through this slide here is really to showcase some of the benefits for businesses through Explore IP. So as I've already said, it's a one centralized database that allows to search through, like I said earlier, a little over 5,000 different IP assets held by public sector institutions. And we tried really hard to make also life easy, as Chris has mentioned earlier, in that the connection is made directly with the public sector institution, so with the IP holder. We don't really filter through those communications. The communication goes directly to the IP holder themselves, and there's the ability to start the conversation right away. There's also these two buttons that you see at the top of the screen. I'll do a shared screen later, and I'll demonstrate them. So say the Save Your Search button here allows the person doing the search to save their search based on the search criteria that they've used. And that's really to kind of keep up to date if they're working on a specific technology, in a specific technology area, where there may be, some new patents, some potential new patents that will be added. So the intent is really to receive notifications every time there's a new opportunity that corresponds to that search criteria that is published on the platform. And the collaboration button is kind of reversing the platform upside down, in that instead of looking for existing opportunities, industry can present their own challenges to us based on the specific technology areas that I've listed earlier, and sending a few elements to describe their technology challenge and what kind of potential assistance they could benefit from a public sector institution. And then we could put them in touch with institutions that would potentially be able to help them in that. We're still in the beta phase for the collaboration button, but we're working on making it a more prevalent part of the process in going through Explore IP. And finally, here's just a quick summary of who the IP holders are, who the institutions that we call IP holders are. So we mostly have, as they're listed here, post-secondary institutions, such as the University of Waterloo here today, federal departments, as an example, again, NRC. And we also have some hospitals, research centers, and some not-for-profits that manage publicly held, IP portfolios, mostly. And then the last slide here before I do the demonstration is regarding some of the initiatives that we've launched over the years. So I just wanted here to showcase our latest initiative, which is the Net Zero campaign. So which you see on the screen here under the green innovation tag. So the intent of this was really to promote and to bring forth some of the technologies that were developed that were in line with Canada's net zero transition. So that was part of the focus and the goal that we were doing through that specific tag. We also had previously the COVID-19 tag, which we are revamping right now. And the intent is really to kind of keep moving forward with the various areas of technology of focus of our government, as well as our partners and public sector partners. So that's that. And then here's just our a quick slide on our contact information, which I believe this is recorded, so you will have access to it after this webinar. But our email address is very straightforward: exploreip@canada.ca, and our website is www.canada.ca/Explore IP, or you can just Google Explore IP and you will get into the database. which I will show you right now. So once you get into the website, I won't spend too much time on this, but it's just to kind of showcase the different features that we have on the platform. So it's a database, like I said earlier. So we can search using keywords. We can search if we have a specific patent number that we're looking at, or if we have a specific researcher that we're familiar with that we would like to see what kind of opportunities they've published for collaboration. It's all through the search bar. We can use those terms directly here, or we can refer to what we've presented here as our yeah, there you go. Zoom out a little bit. Yeah, so this is kind of a visual summary of all the opportunities that we have, and they're all color-coded, and each circle here presents a specific subcategory of research, and the intent is really to kind of just showcase like the dimension or the size of the circle represents the number of opportunities that are within that specific technology area. And as I hover through them, you see the different categories, sorry. And if I click on any of them, then it will show me the exact number of opportunities as well as the research organizations that own them. And this is a different way of doing the search. So if I click on the opportunities here, the number of opportunities, it will lead me to the results page. And this is one way of, kind of getting to the results page if we want to do a little bit more of a broader search, and then we can narrow it down using keyword searches specifically. We can also use these search criteria here to narrow it down. I won't go through them, but yeah, once you use the platform, feel free to scan through them and see which ones can help you narrow down your search. And these are the two buttons that I mentioned earlier. And if we're interested in any opportunity, like for instance, the first one here that's held by the NRC, we can just click on the opportunity, and then we'll have a little bit more of a detailed summary of the patent, this specific patent, and we can scan through it. We have the description. This description here has been simplified through a collaboration that we have with Clarivate in order to make the patent language a little more accessible for individuals scanning through the platform. We also had the bibliographic data and the technology fields for this specific opportunity. And at the end, we added some related opportunities as well. So if there's related to the specific inventor, as well as the technology field, if there are any other patents that could be of interest for the person doing the search, did be listed here. And the last element here is this map that show cases where the patent has been applied for or where it has been granted, as well as all the publication numbers on the side here. And then if we're interested in any of these opportunities, all we have to do is click on this button here, and it'll pop up a small form that you have to fill out, and then you get in touch with the institution directly. Like for instance, in this case here, your contact form will go directly to Chris, and he will sort out through the communications, and he will connect you with the proper person to discuss the opportunities with. We also have this tab here where we list all of our research organizations, which you can search through. So like I said, there's 63 of them nationwide. We can search through province and territory if we're interested in that, as well as through the technology fields based on the expertise of each of these institutions. And just because, of today's presentation, I just wanted to pull up our two presenters here. So the National Research Council, which is one of the institutions that has the most patents on our platform, is listed here. So we have a description of their institution, as well as a list of their opportunities as well here, with the same visual summary of their opportunities, as well as the categories of research. And the same applies for the University of Waterloo as well, which also holds quite a lot of opportunities on our platform. And they have the exact same portfolio description, as well as this visual summary of their opportunities that are listed on our platform. So that is it for me. And just like the two gentlemen before me, we'd be very happy to answer your questions at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reda. Grant, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much. My name's Grant Lyons. I'll just take a few minutes. I don't have any slide deck. I was keenly watching all the ones before to try and do a wrap up or the cleanup job here at the end. So I'll just explain a little bit about my perspective, what I do, what our group does within the federal government, and how perhaps it connects between some of the issues that Chris and Mike talked about. So as explained, I work in a group that's modestly named the IP Center of Expertise within ISED, Innovation, Science, and Economic Development. What we do is provide internal advice within the federal government regarding IP issues to government departments. We provide IP training, and we deal in many issues or many areas that have a strong IP focus. grants and contributions, federal funding flowing to companies, procurement, research. So I can give you a little bit of perspective of when we're involved in the IP issues and negotiation of the IP aspects of the agreements, some of the things that we bring to bear and some of the observations we have. Because we often, if there is a federal program that is funding companies or academic institutions, we'll provide them with advice, and we may, at their request, get involved, and we often do get involved in the negotiations of the IP aspects of the funding agreements. And we've and many of these issues that Mike and Chris have raised, we have there's a lot of I guess complications, or say complexities, to the IP landscape. And what I think we like I'd like to think we do is the people in our group have a lot of IP experience, in private corporate experience included. And I think we bring that recognition or acknowledgement and understanding of some of the complexities that the company's academic institution research partners are facing, and try and bring that to bear to the negotiations in trying to get to an endpoint. And really that's I think what we consider success is when we work with the federal government programs to get to an end agreement on the IP perspective that is the right balance. And I'll probably use that word a little bit more as I continue on, but it really is getting to the right balance. And that's what we consider a success, because overall we want these entities that we're dealing with, we want them to be successful. And that really is what we consider success, to get to a properly balanced IP aspect of the funding agreement. And really, we're focused on commercialization, benefit to the country. I think that's something that we really want to keep in mind. And we're, given the experience that our group has, I think we're really bringing the ability to adapt, not just understand the IP landscape, but adapt appropriately and hit the balance between what the applicants are looking for and what the government is looking for. And what I'll say is, and I'll use this phrase a lot, and if any of the people on the call have been on negotiations with me, you've probably heard me say it, is that I look at ourselves, this is at least a bit more perhaps of a personal view, as we have an obligation to be a good steward of the IP that is generated. I think there really is a recognition within the government, more recently than in times past. I came here 3 years ago from private practice, and looking at some of the older agreements, I mean, the IP provisions are almost one-liners. So I think there's a more sophisticated appreciation that IP is a valuable asset, and I say we should be good stewards of that asset on behalf of the taxpayer. I always go back to, and probably reluctant to talk about government funding, I prefer to think of it as what it is. It's taxpayer funding. And I think we have to be good stewards on behalf of the taxpayer to make sure that that asset is being commercialized with an appropriate benefit to the country or to applicants in the country. On the other side, I think we do have an appreciation if we can understand, and all the parties, academic institutions or companies or research partners that are involved in seeking or obtaining federal funding, if they can explain a lot of the IP landscape, everything, IP ownership, if there's any pre-existing obligations, pre-existing ownership or licensing obligations, if there's a commercialization plan, an IP strategy to protect and commercialize the project activities. And I'm even looking, I mean, IP is a private right, the full scope, enforcement on a lot of those issues that Mike, and Chris talked about. That's what we want to understand. So if the parties involved can adequately and sufficiently and coherently explain those situations with a view to where is the benefit going to be, we want it to be in Canada, then we can probably often, we can be one of your best advocates. If we can understand the situation, then we can bring that appreciation to bear on IP clauses that perhaps can be modified and adaptable to give all the players, all the third-party players, the agility and flexibility to conduct their business in the manner that is commercially reasonable for the project. And again, that's a phrase I use frequently. We want to be commercially reasonable. So I think that's part of what we bring to bear on any of negotiation to get to a conclusion of a successful IP clause. And on the flip side, I always ask that the companies or institutions that are negotiating with us appreciate and acknowledge our job and to be good stewards. I should be able to and want to be able to have a credible, logical, and defensible position to explain to my neighbor, my next door neighbor, the taxpayer, how his or her investment is going to benefit from an IP perspective the country, as opposed to just I should be able to have a credible story that is persuasive, and that's my job, to make sure we're hitting the right balance on behalf of the taxpayer. And that's all I ask, is that when in the negotiation, that everybody approach it with that perspective of bearing in mind the other side's point of view. And that usually gets us to a more expedited conclusion. And it's not as purely adversarial, because like I said, we want all the players to be successful. But we do have an obligation to be good stewards with respect to the IP as an asset. So with that, I'll stop, and concluding minutes. If there's questions or any other discussion, happy to jump in and everybody else obviously too.
Thank you so much, Grant. Yeah, as we have a few minutes left, posing some questions that have been coming in as you all have been sharing. So thank you for that. The first question that we'll put out to the group is the following. Do you have any specific advice for a startup who's interested in partnering with a large industry partner and an academic institutions? And what may be some of the steps that they should take to protect their IP?
I'll give that a start. These are tricky situations, in fact. Obviously, non-disclosure agreements are a starting point, but non-disclosure agreements in themselves are not sufficient. As you know, people can say, well, oh yeah, well, we already knew that anyway. So certainly if the startup already has IP and they want to protect it, they should file sooner rather than later on anything that they want to make certain is secure. Beyond that, I would try to make sure that everybody really clearly understands their role. Is the big company a potential competitor, or are they merely an end user? Is the startup building a product offering and accumulating IP around that, and then want to sell to multiple companies, of which this large company is just one potential end user? That sort of structure could work well, but you really need to make sure that everybody understands their roles and what they expect to get out of this at the beginning. And of course, it all depends on the details. The devil's always in the details, but those are some of the things that I would think about. You certainly have to be careful.
Thanks, Mike. Chris or Grant, do you have any other ideas sort of from your experiences?
The only thing I would kind of echo Mike's comment. I mean, the non-disclosure agreements can get you so far, but if you are able to, at that point, to file a provisional patent or something that will give you a little bit more comfort when you're in those discussions, I think that's a really critical aspect, and that should always be something that a startup looks at before getting into discussions with larger companies.
I would just throw in not Explore IP, but Elevate IP. If you want to Google Elevate IP, as far as startups, if you're looking to develop an IP strategy, get some resources there. That program, you should look at that. It's in play across the country, and it's really focused on development of an IP strategy and providing resources to SMEs. So I think that's a valuable place to look for right away.
Sorry, just one extra thing, Jen. Grant kind of triggered something in my mind. Obviously, IRAP also has what's called IP Assist. which is also a program to support that strategy development and so forth. And that's something that should also be explored by those startup companies and early stage companies.
Yeah,
Perfect, thanks.
absolutely. When it comes to IP, going back to my prior practice, don't sit on anything when it comes to IP protection, whether you're looking at either a patent design, any form of IP. Do not sit around. The passage of time is not your friend. It'll only give you lots of regrets. So get on it, and there's always going to be people that are willing to talk to you about it from the IP perspective on how to protect yourself, or at least be aware of what you're potentially looking into or giving up if you choose not to go one route or another.
Wonderful, thank you. And we'll also, as part of the post-webinar follow-up, can include links to both Elevate IP and IREP links for folks to be able to find out more. We've got a couple of questions that have come in specifically. Retta, this is for you as well. Would Explore IP be interested in learning more about private sector created IP focused on net zero assets and whether that could benefit public sector institutions?
Yeah, that's a very good question. As I said earlier, as of right now, the IP that is being hosted and published on the platform is held by public sector institutions, and it is to benefit industry. However, we're definitely open to conversations and seeing, if there's a way that we could potentially publish more IP on the platform. So that's, yeah, the short
Perfect.
answer.
And in a similar thread, it's also possible there may be opportunities for them to list some of their patent portfolio for licensing and collaboration if that's something that comes through.
It'll have to be discussed with them. So they can reach out to us, and you would have to understand their situation and the funding behind the patent, etc. But we'd have to have the conversations directly with them. So they have our contact information, and they're more than welcome to connect with us.
Perfect. Okay, thank you so much. Another question that's coming in, and this is sort of for the group, is is there a good resource where one could look at sort of around financing or experts sort of in that field who specialize in valuation of intangible IP assets, or where somebody could go to get started if they're interested in finding out more?
I would recommend checking out the Licensing Executive Society. LES has a lot of training opportunities that are extremely sophisticated in this sort of area, and they might be able to recommend contacts with certain firms who do that kind of consulting work. The thing is, to be honest, it's very, very, very difficult to do a meaningful valuation on a very early stage technology. It's, stick your finger in the air and see which way the wind is blowing, but it's awfully speculative until you're getting fairly close to where you can see exactly how productization is likely to work.
Yeah, I mean, there are accountants throughout the country that specialize in IP. I mean, certainly when you get into patent litigation or any IP litigation, valuation, damages, and accounting of profits type experts they're there. I just have to look at the accounting firms. BDC is looking at IP-backed financing. So there is a specialty. It's definitely grown, and it's in Canada. But yeah, absolutely, valuation is a niche area, difficult one, and you got to have sense of the markets, and that's another lecture or another talk unto itself.
Well, one comment I'd add to that is really there are a lot of organizations that do different valuation and use different techniques. But what I would suggest is really understand what kind of assumptions are being used to derive the business value and legal value and so forth, because similar to what Mike mentioned about early stage IP can be really undervalued in a lot of these tools. They depend a lot on the ability to look at markets where there's been transactions and so forth quite often. So just be aware of the limitations of some of these kind of tools when it comes to valuation. And I don't know, Mike, if you share the same kind of feeling, but in my experience, the value is often in the eye of the beholder. And so depending on who you're talking to, that could be incredibly valuable IP, or it could mean very little. So there's a lot of, it's a difficult subject, and there's no really easy answers when it comes to evaluation of your IP.
I will agree.
Wonderful, thank you. And similarly, are there any sort of links or pages that you may suggest for folks that are interested in wanting to understand more about the IP lawyers in Canada? If folks are working with your organizations individually, I reckon there are folks that they can sort of rely on, but do you have any other suggestions there?
Yeah, you can. I mean, I'll just put in an Intellectual Property Institute of Canada is the kind of the main source of, or a professional association of patent trademark agents and lawyers practicing in IP in Canada. So you can go to their website and look for a professional. You can find all the registered patent and trademark agents on CPATA, the College Patent and Trademark Agents website. You can go to any law firm website and search under IP or IP litigation, IP transactions, and look for professionals in your geographic area or not in your geographic area. IP is an international field, so the IP professionals usually do not deal with people in face-to-face context. So I would suggest any of those resources right away.
Wonderful, thank you. And as we, before I hand off to Zane, just wanted to pose to each of you, if there's one key takeaway that you want to leave with the audience today, what would it be?
Well, I'll say be flexible. Figure out what you need versus figure out what starting from a position of oh, I must own the IP and I must have all this control. Figure out what you really need and consider alternative ways of managing IP.
I guess my final thought is that NRC believes really strongly in collaborating with industry, academia, federal departments, etc., to drive business innovation in Canada. And if you haven't reached out to organizations like NRC, University of Waterloo, or whatever, or got a sense of who they are and what they can offer to you, I encourage you strongly to do so. And look for those, because collaborating can be extremely powerful in terms of moving ahead business innovation and growing your company, etc., going forward.
Yeah, takeaway, I would just say understand your IP landscape. If you're dealing with federal funding negotiations, understand your IP landscape, ownership, licensing, pre-existing ownership obligations really well, so you can explain them. And when you negotiate, stick to what's material, not hypothetical what ifs, and that will really help. And we try to do the same on our side, and that will really help move a negotiation ahead to a conclusion really in a more efficient manner.
I guess I'm gonna go last after these great takeaways, and I'm just gonna reiterate what has already been said. I think the key messaging here is that collaboration is key, and it's a really important way for us to move forward. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Wonderful. And now, as I hand it over back to Zane, thank you all so much for sharing your insights with us today. It's been highly, highly valuable and informative. And Zane, I hand it back to you.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you once again for joining the webinar today, hosted by Digital and our wonderful IP manager, Jane. The recording of this webinar will be available on our YouTube channel and our website, and all those attending today will receive a follow-up email in the next couple of days with all of the decks and the resources discussed throughout the session. And that is it from us at Digital, and we'll see you at our next IP session. Goodbye.